Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Lisa McCluskey. Lisa's career has taken her from working in police departments to city administrations and into healthcare. Now retired, Lisa found a new chapter hosting the Silver Divorce podcast, which is dedicated to helping seniors deal with the trauma of late life divorce. Lisa, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before we delve into what it's like to share a private dinner with Betty White, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Oh, good morning, Mike. I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's such a pleasure to see. It's been a while.
It has been. Well, my morning cup is a little different. I like to have Folgers black silk with a scoop of espresso, and then I put some cinnamon and a splash of vanilla extract and brew my coffee.
Oh, man, you got a concoction.
I do.
And it's a high caffeine concoction.
It is, yes. And
I don't know why I didn't take you to be a high caffeine person.
Well, I think it went along with the years of a high demand, high stress job. You just get into that
and
routine.
You have a few of those too.
I have.
Yeah. So tell me again, Folgers silk.
Folgers black silk.
Is that like a Keurig cup or is
No,
it
it's just the old-fashioned ground coffee using a drip. Sometimes I use a 1950s percolator.
Oh, cool.
I love those. The coffee comes out boiling.
Yeah.
But, black silk and then a scoop of espresso on top of the ground, a splash of vanilla extract, and some cinnamon. It's lovely.
Wow. How many of those can you do a morning?
Usually 2 big mugs.
Did you have it this morning?
I sure did.
Well, great. I'm so, like I said, I'm so glad you're here. We've known each other, I guess, probably about 20 years since you got to Memorial and I was at Channel 9 and did a lot of work together, did a lot of good things together.
Yes.
And I think some of them are still going, like the camera network.
Right. The weather camera network, that was amazing once we were able to do that. And everybody could see from any location around the city what the traffic was like, what the weather was like. It was really cool. It was a big boost to Memorial.
And I'm biased, but I think those cameras are in the best places of anyone's cameras.
I think so, yeah.
Lookout Mountain.
Yep.
What's Thunder's place up in Marion County? Jasper Highlands, up on top of Memorial. So they're great vistas. So that was fun to work with you on that. But I want to talk about, we talked a little bit earlier about how we take a very linear approach to the podcast. I want to get the Lisa McCluskey story, and we'll get to podcasting here towards the end. But you grew up in Illinois?
I sure did.
Moline?
Moline, Illinois. I was a river rat. I grew up along the Rock River. And I actually loved it so much that when I bought my first house, it was just a few doors down from my mom and dad right on that Rock River.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So is the local baseball team called the River Rats?
Oh, I don't even think they have a local baseball team. No.
Now, where is Moline in relation? I know it's south of Chicago because Chicago's up at the top. But
yeah, so Moline is part of the Quad Cities. And it was the only place in the country where the Mississippi River runs east and west. So if you were on the south side of the river, you were in Illinois, and the north side of the river, you were in Iowa. So it was actually Bettendorf and Davenport, Iowa, Moline, East Moline, Rock Island, Illinois. So these cities were very contiguous. So it was much like it is here where you're going from, East Brainerd to Chattanooga to Hickson, Red Bank. So very similar in geography.
And thus the Quad Cities name.
Right, the Quad Cities.
Now, what I didn't know, and I grew up in Memphis on the Mississippi River. I didn't grow up on the Mississippi River myself, but Memphis is on. I never knew it went east-west.
Yeah, it did. That was the only place in the country where the Mississippi River ran east and west. It used to confuse everybody who was new.
Yeah.
And it was home to Deere and Company. That was their corporate headquarters, was Moline, Illinois.
That's where I know the name.
Yep.
So you grew up there. You have siblings?
I do. I have an older brother and a younger brother.
So you're the
three.
middle child.
I sure am.
Talk about growing up. I know you had a paper route when you were 12, but were your parents looking for you to get involved and do things? Was that something that came natural, or?
No, my father, he was very much be self-sustaining type of guy. We lived in a 2-bedroom house, 1 bath, a very small house for 3 people. I slept on the couch growing up in the winter, and in the summer I slept on a glider on the sun porch. And we always believed, we didn't really think about being poor versus rich, but we just, there wasn't always a lot of extras, but we had a wonderful childhood. But he was the type of person that he always encouraged us to find ways to make money, find ways to be successful. So both my brother and I had paper routes. I started mine at 12, and it was an incredible experience, actually, because then they would drop the papers at the top of the street, which was 1.5 miles from my house. You would have to go get them, deliver them, and then you were responsible for collecting your own money.
Oh, wow.
And so you had to talk to people at the age of 12 about collecting money from them. And then what you collected, you paid your supervisor, and what was left was your profit. So if somebody didn't pay you, you were out some profit.
That came out of you, didn't come out of the supervisor, did it?
No. But, it did teach me at a very young age to talk to people. And then it also taught me, I'd like to say, empathy, because there were people on my route. I remember this one couple in particular, older. To me, they were older. They were probably, maybe in their 50s, but lived in almost a shack. And there were a lot of times I just wouldn't collect from them because I felt sorry. I felt bad. And I'll never forget the one Christmas. They would always invite me in, and their house was warmed by a coal furnace. So you would go in, and I don't know if you've ever smelled coal burning, but that's what their house smelled like, was coal. So I knew they were very poor. They had to have coal to heat their house. And they gave me a Christmas gift. They gave me a book of Lifesavers, and I knew they couldn't afford it. I knew that took so much for them to buy for me. I wouldn't touch it for months.
Wow.
It sat for months. So, you think, a paper route, that's no big deal. It taught me quite a bit about people just doing that route.
Really young age, too. So you're 12, and just talk a little bit through going that 1.5 miles to get the papers, folding them. How long was your route? How many houses you hit? And how long would it take you? And that's a lot of responsibility for a 12-year-old.
Yeah, I think in today's world that would never happen because, I was on bike when the weather was good and on foot when it wasn't. Very rarely do I remember a parent taking me in the car to do my route. So it was 1.5 miles out and 1.5 miles back. And, you would do it as soon as you got home. And I don't remember how long it took, but it was just something I did, and I would be so happy after I paid my supervisor and I had money left over. I always had money in my pockets.
Yeah, well, that's good, and particularly as a teenager.
Right, exactly, yeah. Especially when you start buying makeup, Bonnie Bell makeup. I remember buying at 13.
That's a life-changing event, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you have any other jobs, or did you stick with the paper route?
No, I did. I was a gymnast, so I did gymnastics for my school and then also for a private organization called Turner. And so I student taught gymnastics. I took dance lessons, and then I was a student teacher for dance as well and earned some money doing those things.
So how old are you when you're student teaching dance?
Oh, gosh, probably 13, 14. Yeah.
I find that incredible.
Yeah. I look back at it now, and I was just incredibly busy. But my poor mom, she was the one to take me all these places to gymnastics and dance class, and she worked. She was head of warehouse accounting for a large supermarket chain. So she had a demanding job, and here we were going all over God's creation. So,
were your siblings similar in that they were staying busy?
They were. My oldest brother had a paper route as well. There were 2 papers in our town, the Dispatch and the Argus. He had the Dispatch and I had the Argus.
So y'all were competing.
That's right.
Who had the morning paper and who had the afternoon?
I had the afternoon.
Oh, that's nicer.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes, he would leave his little mini bike laying around and I would go steal it and do my route. And he had to walk. So I did that. And then in high school, I worked. I laugh when I say this because I sold vacation timeshares. I would finish gymnastics and go with a friend, and we would go to a call center. And my job was to convince people that they needed to have a vacation timeshare in their life.
And you're doing this when you're in high school.
Right.
Did you master the hard sell or?
Yeah, you had to because you got paid based on appointments that you booked for then the salesperson, the closer to go out and close. So you got paid if you booked an appointment, and then you got paid if the person actually signed up for the timeshare. So you had to do the heavy lifting of actually convincing them it was a good idea, that how it could benefit their life and the beautiful places they could go in order for them to say okay for an appointment.
Where was the timeshare? Were there a variety of places?
There were a variety of places, mostly in Florida. Yeah. So that again teaches you a lot about people and a lot about persistence and refining your skill of talking to people.
Yeah. So you were busy all through your years growing up.
I was. Yeah.
Learning those things. And where you decide to go to college?
Well, I actually wanted to go to Southern Illinois University. I was a gymnast, and my plan was to go on a gymnastics scholarship, and I wanted to be a physical therapist. So I was working with my coach, and the recruiters were coming, and of course I wanted to impress them. In gymnastics, when you see them do things like flips on a beam or whatever, that's called a trick.
Okay.
So we were working on a trick that I would be the first time to complete it, really high level. It would be very impressive. Well, with my nerves, I threw the trick and I ended up injuring my back.
Oh, no.
And I had to stop gymnastics. So that changed my whole plan.
That's life-changing for you because that's what you're focused on.
Right. That was a complete change of plan. And so I ended up stepping back and going to a community college for 2 years and for accounting. I didn't really know what I wanted to do once. It was apparent that I was not going to be able to continue in gymnastics. So
how'd you deal with that? I mean, you're a kid. You're out of high school looking at college, and the thing that you've had your eye on for what, 18 years?
Oh,
is gone.
Yeah, Southern Illinois University was the place to go for gymnastics. And I had my heart set on. I had gone to their camps in the summertime to be able to interact with their coaches. And, that was it for me. That was my plan. So devastating, especially since my father was the type that you could live at the house as long as you were in school. But if you were not in school, you had to leave. And, my brother left at 18 and ended up starting his own business. I wasn't ready to leave, so I knew I had to go to school.
Yeah.
And so I stepped back and went to a community college, and I thought, well, I'm going to start in business, and maybe I'll do accounting, but I'll start there. And I took some shorthand classes just as a backup.
And those were common at that time.
Right, very common in your business curriculum.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what I was going to do, but I thought I'll figure it out as I go.
Did you find anything to replace gymnastics in your life?
Well, later I did. Later I did a lot of running, and I actually completed the Chicago Marathon, the Iowa City Half Marathon, did a lot of 10-mile races, 7-mile races.
That's tremendous.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that.
So you get into college and you're in business, and take us from there.
Sure. In college, I was working retail at a department store. It was much like Dillard's is today. It was called Yonkers. It's no longer in business.
Is it an Illinois-based type store?
Yeah. And I started working just as a clerk and ended up getting promoted to be the youngest department manager they ever named, won a national award for sales. And retail's really hard.
Yeah.
And I did that through my 2 years at the community college.
Well, the newspaper had to help you out a little bit with retail in terms of dealing with people, I'd imagine.
Talking to people, in my department, you had a lot of, just variety of personalities coming in, everything from the stay-at-home mom who is in there browsing to the man who's coming to pick out a special outfit for his lady. So you really had to learn about people quickly, what their likes were, so you could make recommendations. The only way to sell is to know your customer and recommend something that they might like. You couldn't leave them just to wander around the department and hope that they buy something. So that was really the impetus to being able to achieve high sales, was that customer service, that personal touch, knowing, assessing them when they come in. How are they dressed? What do you think they're going to like? And then start making recommendations.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you about, is what were some of the things you were able to garner through observation that told you, oh, I'm going to recommend this? Were there traits that customers had coming in that you could spot right away?
You could. I mean, you can look at what they're already wearing. What brands are they carrying? Are they casually dressed? Do they have a child with them? Talking to them, finding out what their life is like. Are they working? Are they just off work? And the more you talk to people, you start to glean enough about their lives where you can start recommending what would fit their lifestyle. And people appreciated it. It's very frustrating if you only have an hour and you're on your lunch hour and you're trying to find an outfit for a special occasion. I found that people really appreciated me bringing recommendations to them.
Oh, I hate shopping.
I know.
If I can't go
Most men
and
do.
Identify the thing I want and get out.
I loved it when a man would come in and he would want an outfit for his lady for some special occasion. And they would always describe their physique. And I would pick out a gorgeous outfit for them. They would buy the entire thing. And then a few days later, the woman would come in and he would describe her as like a size 2 and she was maybe a size 10. And she couldn't be mad because,
Oh, he didn't buy it too big. He bought it too small.
He bought it too small. And I said, well, he described you as, this way. And she would be so flattered that that's how he thought about her.
That's a smart guy.
Yeah, very smart guy. But I always had a lot of fun when the guys came in to pick out things.
Whenever I've gone into stores to pick out something for my wife, I finally learned this routine. I go to the middle of the store and I start just turning in circles until someone comes up and says, can I help you? And I say, oh, please, God, help me.
I just go right to the clerk and I'm like, here's where I'm going. Here's the type of thing I need. And they love it, because otherwise in retail, you're standing on your feet for the whole 8 hours. You don't sit down. And so if you're not helping somebody, you're just sorting through the hangers and straightening up clothes, and that's incredibly boring, but it's so much fun to interact with people.
Yeah. You have someone new coming in all the time, a different personality.
You're right. And then you develop a following. If you're really good at it, you develop a following, and they'll come look for you every time they need something.
So you're the youngest department manager in the store's history. You're doing well. How do you end up at the police department?
Right. Well, there's a man involved, I think. No, retail, as I mentioned, is hard because you're on your feet for 8 hours a day. And it is something that I knew I needed to make some more money. At that point, I was looking to buy my own home. I was single. I wanted to buy a house. I wanted a little more stability with a good pension plan. I wanted to have some health insurance. And so there was an off-duty police officer who worked as security, and I became friends with him. And he told me about the job at the police department and the additional pay, but mainly the benefits that came with it were really attractive. And I wouldn't be on my feet for so many hours a day. So I applied for that position.
And what was the position?
It was actually a clerk steno. It was I always say I'm a bootstrapper. I started at the bottom of the totem pole and worked my way up. Yeah. Which is okay.
Oh, absolutely. And just a little bit we've talked now, you obviously were very determined. You identified what you wanted and you figured out how to get there. So you get into the police department, you start at the bottom, as you say. What happens next?
So I worked for the police department in the detective bureau, and I also worked for the Metropolitan Enforcement Group, which was a drug enforcement agency. had a dual role working for both of them. And did that for a number of years, did everything from being a decoy on investigations.
All right, we got to hear about one of those stories. I mean, how are you a decoy? You're undercover?
Yeah, I actually...
Now see, I met you almost 20 years ago, and I never put undercover cop and Lisa McCluskey together. And I guess that's a good thing. I guess it worked.
Well, I wasn't a sworn officer, but they tapped me. They were trying to go after pedophiles. I was young. I was 21, looked young.
Oh, yeah.
And so they would wire me up and put me in a bulletproof vest and tell me don't wear any makeup, put pigtails in your hair, and I would get on a bike and I would go deliver flyers door to door trying to draw out the particular pedophile that they were trying to capture. And
that's fascinating.
Yeah,
were you not scared at all? Did you not have any nerves, or was it just, oh, this is kind of cool?
I didn't have nerves until they started trying to instruct me about if he comes out with a gun, if he's in his car and he approaches you with a gun, drop to the ground and roll backwards and we'll have you covered. And that made me a little nervous because I hadn't thought about what if he had a gun. I was, they just wanted to draw him out and have him approach me and try something. So, but it was interesting. You learned a lot about people in doing that as well. My vast experience being in the call center, retail, and working even back to the newspaper route, dealing with people helped me.
All those things are layering on top of what your experiences for your next opportunities.
Yeah, it really is. It all comes back to being able to talk to people. They would also put me in a room with people that were getting ready to be interrogated. At first, they did it to scare me. There were a couple of detectives when I got hired. The captain didn't want them around because he knew they would give me a hard time. They were troublemakers, and so he sent them away to bomb school. So I could assimilate a little bit for a week until they came back. And when they came back, they found out that I was the reason they got sent away, and they were really mad. So they went and arrested a suspect that they had been accusing of rape. And they put him in an interrogation room, and they put me in there with him because I was going to take the statement, and then they left.
Oh,
and
wow.
They thought that I would run screaming from the room and never come back again, and they would have a good laugh. They would scare me. Well, they didn't know that I knew how to talk to people, so I just started talking to him, and he told his whole story while I was there with him.
Were you in charge of writing it down?
At that time, I wasn't writing it down. I was just talking to him, and the detectives were watching through the two-way mirror, and then they came in. So after that, they would put me in with suspects routinely first so I could talk to them. And
I'm sure you were disarming to the suspect. Who's this young lady who seems very nice, and she's just interested in, who I am.
Interested in who they are and treating them like human beings, treating them like people. They didn't know I knew their story. As far as they knew, I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
I was just a clerk coming in that was going to be taking some notes. They didn't know anything about who I was, so I didn't take notes. I just talked to them.
Were you able to then go to the detectives and say, this is what he says, or was it recorded?
Well, they were always watching because we had the two-way mirrors and they could hear.
Yeah.
And so then they would come in and we would take the official statement. So it was, I even had fans. So they had a repeat offender. I was at my desk one day and the detectives came in and they were like, hey, we have a request for you. So what are you talking about? Well, so-and-so's here and he says he won't talk to anybody until he gets to talk to you first. And so it was another person they were arresting on crimes against children.
Yeah.
So I went in and talked to him before he would talk to anybody.
How long did you do all this?
I was at the police department for 9 years. Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yeah, I loved it. And then one day the city administrator called. I had done some work with him, and he called and said, I want you to come over to administration. And I said, no, I really like what I'm doing. And He's like, well, I really want you to come over here. I said, well, there's a lot to be said for liking what you do, so I'm going to pass. So a couple of weeks later, he called me again. And again, I said, I don't think so. Then he called the third time, and he's like, look, you're coming to work for me. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. I need you over here. So then I went over to administration.
Oh, that's got to make you feel good, too.
Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of my jobs happened because I was requested, not because I applied.
That's a great position to be in. And what do you attribute that to? And I know all your background and all, but for someone out there listening and hearing that, well, most of the jobs I've gotten, I was requested. How does that happen for someone? What are the little things that you do that get you noticed that someone would request?
Well, one is showing up. Half the battle is being there every day, being consistent, but it's also being open to new ideas, listening to when people are talking, hearing what they have to say, and being open to giving new ideas, having the confidence to put your voice forward. Oftentimes people will sit in a meeting and think, oh, I'm not smart enough. These people are so much more smarter than I am. But really, you have unique perspective and you have a unique background. You can bring ideas forward that nobody has thought about because of that. And if you're afraid to do that, no one will ever know what potential you have. So, and it isn't doing it in a way that's egotistical, but it's doing it in an approach that opens people to hearing what you have to say.
What gave you the confidence to do that?
I think it's just it was a combination of all of the things that I had done in my life. When you're, for example, student teaching, you have to have confidence to teach others to do the right thing, to follow your lead. Being able to talk to people even at the age of 12 about paying you money.
Yeah.
I think it was just being encouraged by a father who wanted you to go out and make your way in the world. I wasn't told that I couldn't do that.
You know what I find interesting about your particularly your early jobs, you talk to a lot of people and they would list something like that on a resume as just, well, here's what I did at this age and but you translate that into what it taught you and the skills it gave you, empathy, being able to talk to people. And I think that's what a lot of people miss when they look back on their experience is how to make it relatable to the job they want.
You're absolutely right. People tend to think of it in a very didactic way. They think, oh, I did this, but what did you learn from doing that?
Yeah.
And if you can take everything that you learned and think about all of the people that mentored you along the way, it's very powerful as you go to step up and as you can learn to be relatable to other people. Most people just want to be heard, and that goes back to what you said about empathy. One of the key characteristics of a good leader is being able to be empathetic, being able to give grace to others, being able to forgive, not making everything about you, but making everything about that other person. I always believed in the Zig Ziglar approach. You can get everything that you want if you help enough other people get what they want.
Yep.
That was my motto going forward in my career. So I always felt like I was there to help my boss get what they needed to get.
And I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm so glad you bring that up because so much of business today has just become people stomping on each other to get what they want.
Right.
And they're ruining relationships. You end up not a good place to work, and it's just not fulfilling.
You have to lift other people up so they want to help you when you need it. And
because you'll eventually need it. Everyone does.
You will. You can't stomp on other people on the way up because it does come back to haunt you. Because I always say, you never know when that little girl that came in as a clerk steno who one day is going to be a vice president somewhere. You never know when that person could control your job.
Yeah.
So, be nice.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a great message. So how long are you in city administration?
I actually was in the city of Moline for almost 25 years. So when I was in administration, I was assistant to both the the city administrator and the mayor. Survived many Republican and Democratic leadership changes, many, many different city administrators.
How difficult is that to walk that tightrope between the partisan political sides? Because one of your bosses is obviously political, getting elected mayor. How difficult is that for you? Not necessarily you to do, but for a person to do.
Well, the number one rule I always followed was don't show your politics. Mm-hmm. Nobody ever knew if I was a Democrat or a Republican. So you have to be Switzerland as far as your political view is there. You are there to do a job that fosters growth in the city. You're there to do a job to, for example, I was also deputy liquor commissioner, assistant fire and police commissioner. I was a director of a music festival.
You had some great titles.
I know. I did whatever job, was I was needed to do for the benefit of the city. Yeah. So not necessarily for the benefit of the current administration.
What was your favorite thing to do when you were on the city administration side?
I think my favorite thing on that side was, I will say I had a favorite mayor. And when he came in, he was a Harvard graduate, and he said, Lisa, I'm going to be a one-term mayor because there are things that need to happen to move this city forward. And it's going to ruffle a lot of feathers. A lot of people aren't going to be happy, but we are going to do it. And it was interesting because he always said we. He never said I. Yeah. He always said we. So that was my favorite time. He actually built a 22,000-seat arena. And
that's huge in a place like Moline.
It was, because his vision was we were the perfect stopping point between Chicago and St. Louis. Yeah. So an act could do a gig in Chicago on Friday, come through Moline, stop on Tuesday or Wednesday, fill the arena, and then they would be in St. Louis for their next show. We were perfect for that. Yeah. And he had the vision to see that. And we had phenomenal acts, Elton John, Neil Diamond, you name the top acts, they all came through our city because of that. And he had vision. And it also revitalized our riverfront as well. So I will say my favorite time was being with a leader who had vision and brought everybody along with him, and you could be part of seeing that vision come into play.
And you mentioned between the police department and the administration, you were there 25 years.
Right.
So why not move to Florida and get into healthcare?
Well, healthcare actually started in Iowa.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, it did. So there were a couple of things that happened. I had been there 25 years, so I was at the top of my pay scale. Yeah. And I wasn't going to make any more money. I had gotten to the point where your annual increases were just in lump sum. You no longer received cost of living increases. It was just a lump sum. You were maxed out. I think I was the second highest paid woman in the city. And so I knew, I had 3 kids. I still had a long time left to work. And the only way to move up is to move out.
Well, and that, that's an important lesson too. At some point, if you're not advancing the way you think you should or can, sometimes you got to leave.
You have to leave. And, sometimes too, leaving means taking a step back.
Yeah.
So when I left, I had a friend tell me about a position with Genesis Health System as an account executive for the cancer service line. And it was a step back in pay, a few $1,000s a year. And they actually reported my pay in the city, the newspaper, did a front page story on my leaving, and which caused some problems with the new team because they all thought I was going to get paid a lot more than what I already was. So, but it was a step back. And though within 18 months, I had, I think, tripled or quadrupled my pay. So
that's a calculated risk on your part. I mean, when you were considering that, how big of a hurdle was that for you to say, I'm going to be taking a step back in pay? You obviously saw more of the vision of what the future was.
I saw a vision that healthcare was growing, that health system in particular was growing. I believed in myself. I believed in my capabilities, that, I was certainly capable of doing the job. And there were much more advancement opportunities in healthcare than there were city government, because I was also at a point in city government, I had thought I was going down the city administrator path. And I went through and received my local government manager certification, so I could be a city manager. But I'd have to move, I would have to leave my community in order to do that. And I wasn't really quite ready to do that with young children.
Yeah.
And so, but ironically, I ended up doing that later.
So you leave city administration, you get into healthcare. How long are you doing healthcare in Moline before you look at opportunities outside of it?
So I was there, I believe it was about 4 years, because I started in the Iowa facility, and then I was within a year promoted as a director to the Illinois facility, and it was a total of 4 years. And then my boss took a job in Florida as a vice president, and he asked me if I would come and head up his team, and I ended up agreeing and moving to Florida to become the director for marketing and communications for Martin Health System.
Was that a difficult decision?
It was a difficult decision because it meant leaving our families behind.
Yeah.
And I thought it was temporary. I thought, I'm going to do this. I need the experience. I'm just going to do it for a couple of years. Then I can come back and work at the health system in Moline, because Moline had, a couple of Genesis, and it also had another health system. So that was my plan: go get the experience, do as much as I can, and then go back.
And you also had some health issues when this all came about too, huh?
Yeah. So I had, of course, before I was leaving for a new position, I wanted to get all of the traditional health exams out of the way, the annual exam, the mammogram. Went and had a mammogram and needed to have a biopsy. So the day that the moving van was there packing up all of our things to head to Florida, I was at my surgeon's office, and he was telling me that I had a positive biopsy and I had an advanced form of breast cancer.
This is all the same day you're packing up.
Yeah. The moving van was at our house, and I was scheduled my start date was scheduled and everything.
How in the world do you deal with that? I mean, moving's a pretty stressful time.
Yeah.
And then to have this thrown on top of it, your head's got to be spinning.
It was, because you don't know what to do. You don't know, do you cancel your promotion? And if you cancel your promotion, will they keep you where you are? Will they take you back?
Right.
And then you have the health concern over, oh my gosh, am I going to live?
And you got young kids.
And I have young kids, yeah. So I ended up deciding that, well, at this point in time, I can't really cancel the promotion. We had purchased a house, and that would be a whole nother complicating factor. I was very fortunate in that my boss was a very empathetic man, and I had my surgery in Iowa and a lumpectomy, and then I moved and started my new position, and I would go and have chemotherapy on Fridays and in the morning, and leave when I called it the meltdown. When I could feel myself melting down, I would leave for the day. And then I also had my radiation, 33 rounds of radiation in Florida.
Oh, my goodness.
Mm-hmm. All while trying to start a new job and trying to impress the physicians and know what I'm talking about. And if you've ever had chemotherapy, there's definitely chemo fog, chemo brain.
Yeah.
It's really hard to be at the top of your game when you're going through chemotherapy and radiation.
Plus, you're moving a family, and how old are your kids?
oh gosh, my youngest at that time was in elementary school.
Yeah, so you got to be mom and get them settled in school and do all those things too.
And not scare them.
And not scare them.
We didn't really want them to know that I had cancer. We didn't want them to worry that, mom may die. So we tried to keep it very low key. I even tried to keep it very low key with my team. I didn't want them to think that they couldn't approach me with problems. I didn't want them to hold back. I wanted them to treat me just as they would anybody coming into a new position. So
I'm just flabbergasted. I'm sorry. That's the only way I could put it. I mean, the focus and drive you've had through all that's just incredible. And I want to get us to Chattanooga and Memorial and more specifically to your present day podcast before we run out of time. So if you can kind of walk me through the Florida years and what got you here to Chattanooga.
Okay. Florida, I was there, I say 4 hurricanes. When we moved there, they said, we haven't had a hurricane in 20 years. You don't have anything to worry about. That year, they had a major hurricane. And then 2 weeks later, the second major hurricane. And then next year, they had 2 more hurricanes. So was on the storm team. Very, very, very stressful time.
Yeah, because hospitals don't take hurricanes off.
No, they don't. They don't take hurricanes off. And you think about it then, the cell phone infrastructure wasn't what it was today. And if we wanted to get information out to the media, we had to drive down to West Palm Beach, which was where all the media was, and actually talk to people. And so very challenging time. Yeah. Was there 4 years, and I was getting my master's degree at the time. We would travel from Florida to Illinois, and Chattanooga was always our stopping point. It was our halfway point. Loved Chattanooga. Was in the process of finishing my master's, and a recruiter reached out to me about a position in Chattanooga. And I wasn't quite ready to move. I knew I wanted to be a vice president. Mm-hmm. And all of my cohort, they said, hey, just go practice. It takes time to get a vice president's job. Just go practice. It'll be fine. So that's how I approached it. I would love to be in Chattanooga. It's a beautiful city, but I knew that you're unlikely to get a vice president position on your first try. So I treated it as practice.
And when you say treated it as practice, the interview process with the recruiter recruiting you and just going through that phase of it, and that's a legitimate thing to do. The more you do that, the better you get.
Yeah, because the Memorial interview process, I think I ended up doing like 5 rounds with there were a ton of physicians involved and leaders. And it had gotten to the point where I told my then husband, if they call me one more time for another interview, I am not going. They cannot make a decision.
Well, in that position, if I'm not mistaken, is very doctor-centric, being the director, the vice president of marketing.
Yes.
The docs are very important in that whole process.
Yeah, it was very interesting going in because they were used to the marketing people being order takers. You come in, I'm going to give you my order, and you go do it. My philosophy was a lot different in that I wanted them to be part of the creative process. And so I would do creative processes where they were at the table and they were seeing the research as I saw it. They were helping to craft the messaging. They were immersed in the process, and that was different for them. So, and then I put them on camera, and I had them speaking on camera, which was completely unusual for them as well. So they had more ownership. It wasn't just me coming in and saying this is, how marketing should be, but they had complete ownership in the process.
How long did it take for them to accept you and your method as opposed to being an order taker? And was there a pushback?
Oh, yeah, there was a pushback. There was a big pushback. And I will say not among all the physicians. It was just one particular group that we had acquired, and they had never done big campaigns before. So there were a lot of nail-biting times when, they were calling for my head because they didn't think I knew what I was doing. But it was ironic later, after campaigns roll out and numbers are going up and patients are talking about it, the communities are talking about it, I was told, well, I guess you did know what you were talking about.
Well, and I would imagine one of the challenges is you're dealing with not only a bunch of different personalities, but let's face it, doctors. Right. I mean, who are never wrong.
Well, not only are they never wrong, but they are super highly educated.
Yes.
And I like to tell the story about Dr. Badra because he tells this story in conferences himself. He is an interventional pulmonologist. He is world renowned. He travels the world teaching other physicians how to do what he does. And he detects lung cancer, the very smallest lesions of lung cancer. And when we hired him, he came to my office to talk about marketing. And he came with a presentation. And he went through this entire presentation of how we were going to market him. And I sat very patiently and waited for him to finish. He finished, and I looked at him and I said, we're not doing any of that. I said, what you're going to do is get in a car with with your physician sales rep. You are going to go visit every referring physician in the entire region. You're going to answer their questions, and they are going to have your cell phone number. And that's where we're going to start to build your business. So, there is an element to working with physicians that is being confident enough to know what needs to be done, and also being able to talk to them and have them see the vision and come along with you in the vision and be a part of it. Because once they were a part of it, then they believed in it.
Do you think you would have had that confidence if you didn't have those early years of the newspaper route and the department store and the gymnastics teacher? I mean, because you were in leadership roles at a pretty young age.
Yeah, probably not, being able to talk to rapists and robbers. And
yeah, this doctor's not going to intimidate you. What are you going to do?
Yeah, it is. I would say there's a certain element to that. It is being exposed to so many different personalities and people at varying levels of, I would say, accomplishment.
Yeah.
I talk to people from high level leadership positions to the lowest level leadership positions. And today we tend to coddle kids. We shelter them and we don't expose them and to those types of opportunities.
Yeah, we're afraid they're going to get hurt.
Right.
How long were you at CHI Memorial?
Almost 14 years.
And when did you retire?
In 2021.
So 2021, you retire. Take us through retiring and what you're doing today and how it all came about.
Yeah. So retired in 2021. Thought I was going off into the promised golden land of retirement.
Well, you've worked hard and you've saved your money and you've done well.
It was over 45 years, close to 47 years I had worked, if you think about all those years. And I started refinishing furniture as a hobby before I retired. And then my plan was I was going to start selling my work. And I was blindsided 17 months after retirement with divorce. My husband decided that he did not want to be a married man anymore. And I will say, we were going through our retirement struggles. It's a big struggle when you go from having some independence to being in the house together 24/7.
Yeah.
It's a big struggle for somebody who is used to being in a leadership role. I went through an identity crisis. I wasn't anybody's boss. I had nobody to mentor. I had nothing to create. I wasn't envisioning anything. And so I had that whole crisis going on. And then you add to it, you're suddenly in the house together. You are having differing opinions on how to spend your money, right? So, I was the one that I did all of our finances, our investing, and read everything I could. I believed your first 2 years you had to be very conservative, that you didn't want to outlive your money, and you had to learn to live on a budget while your spouse may be thinking, hey, we worked for this all these years. It's time to enjoy it.
Yeah.
So you have those clashes, and you think, well, we've been married a long time. Marriages ebb and flow. We've been through this before. You think you'll get through it. You think you'll get over it. And then suddenly somebody files for a divorce.
And that completely blindsided.
Completely blindsided me. We never talked about it.
Wow.
Never said the word divorce, never discussed it. Yeah.
And how do you deal with that? I mean, obviously, number one, shock. Where do you go from there?
Very shocked, embarrassed. I had no idea that gray divorce, and that's divorce with people over the age of 50, now accounts for 1 in 3 divorces today. So I didn't know that at the time. I was very embarrassed, thinking that, wow, how could people who thought we had this wonderful marriage are going to look at us like, wow, you failed.
And was that failure personal? I mean, you're like, because you mentioned not having someone to mentor, not have all these things you were doing as a leader, and here's this other aspect of your life that all of a sudden just fell apart. So did you feel like that failure was reflective of you?
Yes. Oh, yes. I didn't even tell anybody for the first 2 or 3 months that he had filed. I was too embarrassed to talk about it. I actually think the first person I told was Dr. Badra. So I didn't want to talk about it. And then I started learning everything I could about divorce, because after you get over the emotional shock that you're going to lose your partner that you've been with for 34 years, you start to think about the money. Oh my gosh, how's that going to work? Everything that we've saved and worked for, what happens to that? So I started reading everything I could, listening to everything. But then I realized that you have to be your own advocate in divorce, because in Tennessee, it's a mandatory mediation state for high conflict, for contested divorces. And attorneys are doing 8 to 10 mediations a week. They don't have time to focus on your case. So if you're not putting your numbers together, you're not putting your ideal scenario together, nobody's going to do it for you.
So you channeled that hurt and that embarrassment and everything else into learning as much as you could. And then how did you come up with the Silver
Divorce podcast?
I'm sorry, yeah.
Well, I realized that there's a huge knowledge gap.
Yeah.
Most people don't know what to do when they're hit with the divorce bomb. And oftentimes in cases where maybe one person had a business or a woman was a stay-at-home mom, the one spouse will say, well, I'm going to pay you this and I'm going to take that. And they go along with it because they think if they weren't earning the money, they don't have the power. And that is so not true. Marital assets are marital assets, no matter who brought the money in. And I realized, God, there's this huge knowledge gap. People just don't know. And there's so many heart-wrenching stories. You know, the two things that bring out the most greed are death and divorce. And divorce is like both.
Yeah.
You know, it really is. Only you still have to deal with that person for a period of time. So I realized one of the other things I always believed was I've been given gifts. And, you know, I'm compelled to share those gifts. God calls me to share those gifts. And I have the gift of communication.
Yeah.
So when I looked at podcasting, Memorial, actually, when I was there, we started podcasting very early. It was way too early.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we did. Memorial had its own podcast. So I knew a little bit about it, and I had been watching it, participating. I thought, I can reach a lot of people with podcasting. So I started the Silver Divorce podcast. And I have to say I was very fortunate. I was in talking with Clint Powell, who everybody knows is like the podcast godfather in Chattanooga.
He's the guru.
He is.
He showed me the way.
Yeah, I was picking his brain, and Shawn Whitfield came in and said, what are you doing? And he contacted me later. He believed so much in the concept that he offered me some studio time in his studio to let me get my feet on the ground and get the podcast going.
And when did you start it?
March of 2024.
So you're coming up on a year.
Coming up on a year. Yeah.
How often do you publish an episode?
Well, I started just twice a month. Well, now I'm publishing about every 10 days. So I'm inching toward weekly. So I'm about ready to go weekly.
What do you like about it?
The people. I love the guests. It's amazing to me how freely people share their expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And most all of the guests that I've had have been through the trauma of divorce themselves, and that propelled them to shift their career and to go into a career helping others. Maybe they're a therapist or a life coach, but their entire focus began with the divorce and how can we help people going through that trauma.
And this sounds strange, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, whether you know them now or not, that are going through this. Probably more people than we imagine.
Yeah, there is what's called the silent divorce. And it's interesting because women file for divorce first in 79% of the cases. They plan for 2 years before they actually file for divorce. On average, it's 2 years. They're thinking about it. They're planning it. So the silent divorce is very common in long-term marriages where people live as roommates.
Yeah.
You know, they stop doing activities together. You know, she has her girls groups and he goes out hunting with the guys or whatever, but they don't do much together. They lose their emotional connection, and then quickly their physical intimacy goes by the wayside. Mm-hmm. And so they kind of drift along in this state of almost roommates for a long period of time before somebody says, I can't do this anymore, and files for divorce.
What would be your recommendation to someone who might be listening to this and going through that right now?
You know, divorce, if there isn't abuse involved, emotional abuse or physical abuse, divorce is life-changing for the entire family. And if it is possible to try to recapture your relationship first before you take that step, because it can be financially devastating as well. It impacts your whole circle around you. Your adult children, they experience loss and grief just like you do. So if it isn't a case where there's emotional or physical abuse, step back first and give an opportunity to build the marriage, see a therapist, try to access some resources, talk to each other. Oftentimes we simply stop talking to each other as we did. Try to remember those days, what attracted you to each other to begin with. And then, you know, if you simply need to move on, if you are not happy, then move on and try to be as amicable as you can, because I always say, who do you want to send kids to college? Do you want to send your attorney's kids to college, or do you want to send your own kids to college?
That's a great way to put
Divorce is expensive.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. How can someone find your podcast?
It's the Silver Divorce Podcast. It's on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Pandora, Amazon Music. It's actually anywhere that you would listen to your podcasts. It's on any platform.
I've got 2 more questions for you. This one is, you're also launching another podcast.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
So I'm launching the Empowered Career Woman. It's Rise to the Top, Love Life, and Rise to the Top. So I'm going to be interviewing women who are at the top of their careers and those who are entrepreneurs, and getting their story of how they made it, how they rose to the top. What advice would they have for people who are wanting to make it in the business world or wanting to grow their own business?
That's great aspirational stuff.
Yeah.
I love stories like that. So before I get to my last question, I want to remind our listeners who makes all this possible. Thank you to the Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring My Morning Cup. Follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, and visit TVA.com/do-good-here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. All right, Lisa, last question. And I always ask, what would you tell your 25-year-old self? But God, I could go back and say, what would you ask your 12-year-old self? Because you've been going since you're 12. So what would you tell that 25-year-old self is important for a happy life after you've been through your whole career, and here you are? So look back and what are the important things for a happy life?
I think the most important thing is to learn to reframe. Learn to reframe your situations, something that may happen to you. Maybe you didn't get the job that you wanted. Reframe that into, what does this open me up for an opportunity that I can do? Learn to reframe, learn to have empathy for others and give grace. There are so many people who are going through things you have no idea what they're going through, which leads into how they act. Once you sit down and listen to people, listen to hear, not listen to respond, you can find out what those things are, and you can enrich their life as well as your own. So give grace to people.
And I love the fact that you said give empathy and grace. Through the years I spent in leadership, I learned that too late. Mm-hmm. And particularly after you leave a position and a title and all the things around it, you learn, you kind of do that mental inventory of the things you did well or not. And I think empathy and grace are so important because exactly as you said, you have no idea what people are going through. I mean, you didn't tell anyone you were getting divorced for 3 months. They had no idea. So people are dealing with things in their mind that you might not think they're doing a great job or they're distracted or whatever, but it's serious stuff.
It is. And oftentimes, like me, they're just too embarrassed to talk about it, or they don't even know how to start talking about it, or they view you as the boss. The other thing I like to say is, tell the story from your boss's perspective, or tell the story from someone else's perspective. Because one of the things that, I had to learn about my divorce is what role did I play?
Yeah.
What role did I play in this not working? And once you're honest enough with yourself to say, what role did I play? Tell that story from your boss's perspective. Then you can start to understand and react from that point and heal and forgive. And even in the business setting, forgiveness is very important. If you walk around taking everything personally with a chip on your shoulder and never forgive, you'll have this trail of enemies.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself because it frees you up to heal and move forward.
Wow, I can't add anything to that. That's so well put. And thank you so much for taking time to come and talk today. I really enjoyed catching up with you, and it's always good to see you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.